For the main topic today, we're going to be reviewing an Investopedia article. This article is entitled, What are Healthcare Sharing Ministries? And I thought this would be helpful for us to go through and review as I've brought up cost-sharing ministries now as an alternative. Now, before we jump into the article, I am not sponsored by any cost-sharing ministry whatsoever. I'm not sponsored by Investopedia. I am covering this because I think it's something that you should look into if you're in HopeFilled footstep number 2, if it's a viable alternative, and if you fully understand what the trade-offs are. And the trade-offs are significant. Let's jump into the article. As healthcare costs rise, healthcare sharing ministries are getting a lot of attention. Not all of it good. That's true. As an alternative to traditional health insurance. Open to people who share religious or ethical beliefs, they aren't insurance companies. Rather, they seek to help members share and reduce health care costs. I want to mention that not all HCMs are specifically tied to religion. There are some religion-free options that are out there. Key takeaways. These are the 3 things that if you stop listening to the podcast now, at least take these away and look into it further later. Healthcare sharing ministries are cost-sharing organizations, not insurance companies, and are intended to help cut medical costs for members. The primary function is cutting cost. Takeaway number 2. Membership is open to people who share religious or ethical beliefs, typically Christian. Again, that's not all of these sharing ministries, but many of them do subscribe to a very specific flavor of religion, and they ask that you be an active, participating member of that religion, and that means living out what that religion teaches in order to be a member. You're not going to run into those sorts of roadblocks with traditional health insurance. Number 3, they aren't required to cover or pay medical care costs to follow the Affordable Care Act, ACA, mandates. And this is the most important caveat that you need to understand if you're considering this sort of thing. A cost-sharing ministry, a health cost-sharing ministry, is not legally required to cover what they say they're going to cover you on if you sign up for it, which means if they just decide that they're out of money, they run out of money, it wasn't managed well, they go under business, you're out of luck. You may have thought that you had some sort of quote-unquote coverage, but what you have is a promise from the community that's sharing healthcare costs that they have your back past a certain point, past your responsibility. But you cannot hold the cost-sharing ministry legally liable for what you've signed up. They have it in the fine print. They have it in the ministry's fine print that I have. Now, the cost-sharing ministry I signed up for has never turned down someone who qualified for sharing. Now, qualified is important to mention because the guidelines, the restrictions therein are specific, they're unique, and they're not anything like what you're going to find with health insurance. Let's keep going. The next headline is How Healthcare Sharing Ministries Work. Healthcare sharing ministries are membership groups whose members share religious or ethical beliefs and pay monthly dues that are, in turn, used to pay for the medical costs for other members. Essentially, members make monthly payments similar to premiums, not the same. You cannot legally call it a premium. And those funds are used to pay medical expenses for others in the ministry. This is basically the same sort of principle for how health insurance is supposed to work. Everybody is pooling their money into a company that says, we've got you covered if something really bad happens. And if something really bad happens, the premiums that are paid in that weren't used by members who paid them in, who stayed healthy, who didn't need them, get used to cover those who end up with really nasty circumstances. The cost-sharing ministry is just doing it, but not classifying themselves as insurance, with the main differentiator being they're not legally required to actually release the money to help you in your catastrophe. Healthcare sharing ministries versus traditional health insurance. On the surface, HCMs may look like insurers. Members pay monthly for coverage, must meet a predetermined amount before receiving benefits, and may be required to see in-network medical providers. My HCSM works through a health insurance network. And if I'm out of network, they consider the shareable amount of my bill equivalent to what someone in network would have charged me for the same thing. HCSM members may also receive assistance paying for medical expenses. However, key differences exist that should be understood and considered before choosing this option. Unlike health insurers, HCSMs aren't legally bound to pay for claims according to the terms which parties have agreed to follow. We've covered that. HCSMs don't have to follow the same coverage requirements as Affordable Care Act ACA compliant health plans. Because HCSMs aren't providing insurance, they don't have to comply with ACA mandates. I'm going to pause again here and say this is why they're able to get away with such low premium equivalents. They are able to be much more affordable because they don't have to comply with the ACA. Now, I don't want to get political with my particular opinion on the ACA, but there's no doubt, and cost sharing ministries are proof of it, that the requirements that they impose on health insurance companies results in, for a lot of Americans, much higher premiums. For instance, they don't have to cover pre-existing conditions. The ministry that I'm a part of does cover pre-existing conditions if you've been with them for 3 years or more. Preventative care, reproductive care such as birth control, or services for substance use disorders. In essence, what you need to understand here is there may be some things that you would expect or hope to be covered with a particular health insurance plan, and if you switch to a cost-sharing ministry, you are not going to have those exact same coverages. You're not going to have the exact same things that are considered shareable in the cost-sharing ministry. For us, one major sticking point in recent history was that our cost-sharing ministry does not cover vaccinations. That's all going to be out of pocket, and we found that it's cheapest to go through our health department for most of those. Moving on, HCSMs can require members to follow specific lifestyle requirements to receive assistance with medical costs. For instance, you must not use tobacco and must limit alcohol intake and engage in sexual relations only with your spouse as defined by the HCSM. In addition, you may be prohibited from participating in high-risk activities such as rock climbing, skydiving, and bungee jumping. Now, for any particular HCSM, you need to look through their particular requirements and what it is that they impose on their members, or say that their members must be living up to in order to be a part of the community and to be a part of that ministry. I can speak a little bit to the Christian ministry that I'm a part of. Now, depending on your lifestyle and your worldview, your religion, you may not have much of a difference or an ethical dispute with what the HCSM has in their rules as what makes you eligible or ineligible to be a member. If you do, though, you have a conflict there that HCSM may simply not be for you. I wouldn't say go and try to change your worldview or say that you have something that you don't in order to get into an HCSM, because you could very well run into trouble. You might end up getting kicked out and be in a place where you're in between equivalent coverages for your health insurance, and that's just not a place that I could ever advise anyone to go. Moving on, HCSMs aren't regulated by state insurance agencies or federal entities. Because oversight of HCSMs doesn't exist, members are unable to turn to their state insurance commissioner if they have a dispute over an unpaid medical bill. However, some HCSMs have appeals processes in place if a medical expense is denied for payment or sharing. I think this is as good of a time as any to bring up the fact that in switching over to a cost-sharing ministry, we have had to do a great deal more footwork and phone calls to figure out how everything works. They don't get into it in the article here. Part of the rules is that we go to our healthcare provider and say, we do not have insurance, which means you have to give us the uninsured rate, the cash rate, the out-of-pocket rate. It's technically going to be out of pocket one way or another, be it our money or the money from the pooled ministry. So it has to be the cash rate. It's not legally insurance. You can't charge us an insurance rate. So they put together a bill, and they're supposed to send it to my cost-sharing ministry. They evaluate it, and if there's anything they need to correct, they correct it, send it back to the provider, and if we haven't met our annual household portion yet, the healthcare provider then forwards that bill to us. It's been counted as part of our portion for the year, and we then pay the bill. Sometimes a health provider is not willing to send the bill to the cost-sharing ministry. and they ask us to pay it out of pocket there. They're like, we have had trouble dealing with HCSMs before, and we are not going to, we're just done with it. And that's unfortunately something that I've ran into. It's something you need to be aware of. So maybe talk to any current treating healthcare providers before switching this sort of thing. But for what I'm a part of, we have the option of submitting a reimbursement. That reimbursement process takes much longer and it can be cumbersome. I ran into a situation with the birth of Oliver where the hospital had had major issues with cost sharing ministries before. And I think the bill that they had for the birth, just for the hospital stay, it wasn't for the midwife, it wasn't for any of the prenatal care, it wasn't for the anesthesiologist. It was, I think, almost 30 grand. And that's what they were going to send if we didn't pay it before we left. But they said we could settle for $3,200 if we paid in cash that day. Sounds like a great deal. It does. And I was calling my cost sharing ministry trying to explain it to them. And they're like, no, we want them to send the bill through us. Don't work with them. And they were telling us, well, if they bring it down to the cash rate, it's going to be double this. It's going to cost everybody more money. But we're willing to settle for half because of a direct order that came from our CEO, our CFO. I ended up covering it and trying to file for reimbursement. What followed was like 4 or 5 months of phone calls and headaches and trying to get things sorted. I don't know if I made the right decision in the end, and it just became a lot of time. So it's cheaper, but it can result in more work. I still think it's worth it. For us, it's been worth it, even though we've been through that circumstance. And where we are in Kansas City, almost nobody takes our cost sharing ministry at face value. We had to switch OBGYNs in the middle of this current pregnancy because the birthing center that we originally were signed up for, even though they told us over the phone a couple times that they would take our cost sharing ministry as an alternative, when we were getting things situated in person, they said, oh, yeah, we don't deal with that. And so we had to switch here this month. Tomorrow's actually not tomorrow as you're listening to this, but tomorrow for me as I'm recording is the first ultrasound with our new OBGYN. All right, I digress. Let's get back in. Benefits of health care sharing ministries. Although HCSMs aren't insurance companies and don't provide the same coverage legally as traditional medical insurance, they may have advantages for some people. Monthly HCSMs payments may be lower than traditional medical insurance premiums. Because you're not paying for traditional medical insurance, which requires coverage for things like preventative care, pre-existing conditions, and reproductive care, a monthly HCSM payment or share amount is usually less than a monthly insurance premium, in my experience, significantly. Still, under the ACA, many families qualify for healthcare subsidies. We're almost done, so stick with me. HCSMs don't have individual and or family deductibles. Now, an annual household portion for me is the equivalent, not equivalent, it's not like, it's the alternative to a deductible. Traditional health insurance plans include a deductible that must be paid out of pocket before medical benefits are paid out. With an HCSM, you pay what's called an annual unshared amount, or an annual household portion in my case. This is the out-of-pocket amount that you agreed to pay for eligible medical expenses before your medical bills are shared, with the hope being if you ever meet what you said you're going to pay for shareable medical expenses in a given year, and you have expenses beyond that the ministry takes those on. The annual unshared amount, which resets each year, is typically lower than a traditional health plan deductible. For instance, with Solidarity Health Share, the annual unshared amount is $750 for an individual, $1,500 for a couple, and $2,500 for a family. And I think the cost sharing ministry that I have has really low unshared amounts for the year, but they also have very high ones. And as a result, you also get a lower share amount, a monthly share that you have to pay in. And I want to add that not all health cost sharing ministries work like this. The one that my parents use actually have a maximum out of pocket for the individual per instance, per medical instance. So, for example, my dad had a brain tumor that he was diagnosed with. He's okay. but he had to go get that removed surgically through his nose. And later he needed a gamma knife. That's very expensive stuff. However, the way his cost-sharing ministry worked, they all considered that one medical event, the diagnosis of a brain tumor. And they paid their little bit for what that event should be. And their cost-sharing ministry has successfully paid for all of his treatment for the brain tumor since then. That's been incredible. Let's keep moving. Members might receive assistance on medical bills even if they aren't eligible for premium subsidies through the ACA marketplace. Although you still would need to pay for your own preventative care plus annual unshared amount, you might receive assistance from HCSM to cover any major medical expenses due to illness or injury. I've seen that. Example of health care sharing ministries. As of 2021, 107 HCSMs have been certified by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. One example is MediShare, which may or may not be mine, which is a nonprofit HCSM of Christian Care Ministries Incorporated. If you are a member with a $3,000 annual household portion, AHP, or annual unshared amount, you would pay your medical bills out of pocket until you reach $3,000 for that year. That's when your benefit kicks in. It's important to note that only eligible medical bills as defined by the HCSM apply to the AHP. For instance, if you see your doctor for preventative care, that bill does not count toward your AHP. However, if you get sick and see your doctor, that bill is eligible and would apply to your AHP amount. Once you meet your AHP, all eligible medical bills are submitted for sharing and payment. I just want to add that part of the logic behind not covering preventative care is that that's a predictable cost that can be budgeted for by families. And they see that the cost-sharing ministry's goal is to defer risk for the unexpected, and preventative care is expected and predictable. Another example is Solidarity Health Share, which covers some preventative care. Like MediShare, you pay an annual unshared amount before eligible medical expenses are shared for payment. However, one wellness exam per year is eligible for sharing, which might include certain screening labs and services such as mammograms and colonoscopies. Keep this in mind if you decide to look into any of these. Let's jump to the bottom of the article. The bottom line: if you are considering an HCSM, it's important to shop around to see which medical services are covered and which aren't, what your annual unshared amount would be, and how much the HCSM charges for administrative application, program, and other fees. In addition, you should review the HCSM's membership requirements to see if these are terms to which you are willing to agree to join. Failure to adhere to these terms could result in denied application for membership or cancellation. And while that's basically it, in my closing thoughts, I want to say that these health cost-sharing ministries, sometimes they have offered other alternatives to traditional insurance for such things as long-term care and even such things as long-term disability insurance alternatives. And while I'm not going to sit here and tell you I recommend a particular one, I think you should shop around. And I think if you're shopping around to look for a cheaper insurance, it might be worth your time, if you're willing to comply with membership guidelines and requirements, to consider one of these, because it can significantly drop your costs in a season of life where every dollar matters, in order to help you build your hope-filled financial future. If you are listening on a platform with a comment section and you have experience with an HCSM, please tell us about it. I'm sure everyone who has access to that comment section would love to hear your story. I really appreciate it when you guys do that. You're so good. With that, until next week, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.